Assalamualaikum and good greetings. So today we'll be watching a video titled "Where Were Joseph and Mary From?" Bible Contradiction number 5. So yeah, this is again one of the video in the list of video where I'm watching to learn about Christianity. We have covered 4 contradiction videos prior to this. The first 2 I'm familiar with, the next 2 I'm not that familiar with, and I'm not sure how significant as an argument they are. So we'll see about this number 5. Without further ado, let's watch.
Supposed Bible contradiction. Did Joseph and Mary live in Nazareth before Jesus was born, or only after? Luke records Mary and Joseph were residing in Nazareth before traveling to Bethlehem, and returned there later. However, Matthew doesn't mention this initial trip, but says that after Joseph brought his family up from Egypt, he went and lived in a city called Nazareth. So the argument is, Matthew implies this is the first time the family has ever resided in Nazareth. However, that is not what the text necessarily says. A better understanding of this passage can be seen by looking at the details Matthew gives and what the historian Josephus says. First, Matthew never says Mary and Joseph did not travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem, nor does he say they were originally residents there. He just reports that Christ was born in Bethlehem. Luke just provides more of a backstory, and Matthew's silence is not a contradiction. Second, as we went over in the previous supposed contradiction video, Mary and Joseph spent some time in Bethlehem, probably about 2 years. This is evident in how the ancient culture moved around, Luke's use of time gaps, and that Matthew records the wise men were still searching for the Christ after his birth. So some time would have...
So when the mention of Luke's use of time gaps, meaning that how Luke write things, normally many events is not mentioned. Is that what is mentioned about the second point, Luke use of time gaps? Meaning that, because when say Luke's use of time gaps, meaning that is it his methodology of writing to jump, over some time lapse to have certain effect or something? Is it what they mean by Luke's use of time gaps? Or is just people observe that Luke seems to jump a lot in terms of the time frame without knowing purpose, intent, etc.
Passed before they would have made their way to Bethlehem. This would have given the couple time to move from sleeping in the initial manger to an actual house, as Matthew records. Thus, as many scholars deduce, Mary and Joseph stayed in Bethlehem for at least 1 year or 2 years. Third, remember the Gospels record Mary became pregnant by the Holy Spirit as a virgin, and because of this, there is evidence she was vulnerable to shaming and insults due to the fact she became pregnant out of wedlock. Thus, their stay in Bethlehem would have been good for Joseph and Mary. It would have been a fresh start in a new town with possibly Joseph's extended family. So this would have encouraged them to stay in Bethlehem longer and consider permanently settling down there. However, what followed was their flight to Egypt to escape from Herod, where they would remain for a short time until Herod had passed away. Then they could return to the region of Judea. And once Herod the Great had died, this is what Matthew records happened. So the text indicates they may not have been set on going back to Nazareth anytime soon, or returning at all. Last, historian Josephus tells us something interesting that happened in Judea after Herod the Great had passed. His son, Herod Archelaus, seized the throne, and shortly thereafter Passover began, and Jerusalem was filled with pilgrims. But due to a riot in the city about Roman shields being placed on the temple, many zealous Jews took them down, and in the process, many Roman soldiers were killed by a Jewish mob. Archelaus, in retaliation, slaughtered hundreds of Jews in the temple and canceled Passover, sending everyone home. This would have happened around the same time Joseph and Mary were returning from Egypt. So you have Joseph returning to Judea after escaping a murderous Herod, and now you have thousands of Jews leaving Jerusalem, with a report that a murderous Herod had just slaughtered hundreds of Jews in Judea. It doesn't take much for Joseph to put 2 and 2 together and realize he should avoid the region of Archelaus for his family's own safety. And what is interesting is Matthew records that when he had heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a city called Nazareth. So Matthew's account of Joseph being afraid of Archelaus coheres appropriately with what Josephus tells us, and as to why someone should be afraid of him. But this also indicates Joseph was planning on returning to the region of Judea. Otherwise, why would he mention this little factor? So to piece this all together now, Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem for the census, and realized they were in a new town without the rumors and insults of how Mary became pregnant. They stayed there for a time without any desire to return to Nazareth, until the flight to Egypt. Then Matthew implies they were heading back up to the region of Judea, but upon hearing the terrible things Archelaus had done, they were afraid, and withdrew out of fear he may want to carry out his father's will. However, if Joseph and Mary were planning all along on heading back to Nazareth under Herod Antipas, why would there even be a need to mention Archelaus, and why they were afraid of going to his region? If that was not their destination, there would be no need to mention this. Thus, because of their enjoyment of the fresh start in Bethlehem, Matthew implies they were planning on returning there, which was in Judea, but upon hearing about Archelaus, they withdrew and decided to go to Nazareth. Thus, their place of residency was now set on Nazareth. Thus, looking at the context, Matthew's remark about them going to live in Nazareth can make sense. They were originally there many years ago, but enjoyed Bethlehem more and stayed there for a while. Upon coming up from Egypt, they were heading to Judea, but decided out of fear to go to Nazareth instead, just like Matthew reads. To compare this to something else, I was raised in Pennsylvania. However, I lived in Illinois for 3 years, and now I live in Arizona. If I decided to go back to Illinois, however on the way I changed my mind and decided to go to PA, and someone was writing about my trip and says, and I went and lived in the state of PA, that would not mean that was the first time I had lived there. But upon traveling back to Illinois, I changed my mind and instead went and lived in Pennsylvania. My residency was not set on either until I came to choose PA. So Matthew's statement, he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, could just mean this was a decision of residency after weighing both options.
Of course, it is also entirely possible Matthew was just unaware of the fact that Joseph and Mary were originally from Nazareth. That really doesn't create a problem.
Okay, meaning the author might not know the whole story about all of these figures.
Since he never says they are originally from Bethlehem, and therefore there is no contradiction with Luke. I could tell you the history of my parents, but there are still things I don't know about. But that doesn't mean I would not be a reliable source on who my parents are. Thus it seems skeptics are turning a molehill into a mountain, and assuming Matthew is saying more than he really is. There is one possible solution: Matthew meant something else, or it is perfectly fine that he was unaware of this fact, since he wasn't omniscient. Thus this supposed contradiction really doesn't exist at all.
Okay, yeah. Now, for me, because this is for me just going through all the list of videos, right? So, most of this I'm not aware of even a topic of discussion. Hence, I know, okay, some people discuss these things. If I'm going to evaluate, okay, does this answer actually address all the issues? I actually first to have to listen to the person that is making the argument that this is a contradiction in the Bible. So, how did they refer to the verse themselves, the passage, and what is being taken as what is understood from the passage, and how they concluded that it is a contradiction. After that, then going through this one, for example, or the answer that addressed that contradiction, that would give me more, a better view of, okay, whether this have already answered all the arguments, all the detailed, itemized argument, I guess, to highlight that this is indeed a contradiction, right? So, but of course, going through all of this, I do not have the purview for those, so it's just, okay, I appreciate the topic of discussion, even though I don't even know what is the original argument about, or why did they say it is a contradiction, and how they justify. For example, some of this may be part of what they have already said, but still they say that the argument is stronger because the verse says something that you cannot validate by saying this, etc. Right? So I'm just pointing that out. So all of these videos, most of them is just me learning some of the topic of discussion that exists with the concept, with the topic of contradiction in the Bible. But of course, I don't make any conclusion in my mind about whether this is actually a contradiction or whether the contradiction is resolved, etc., because I don't know the beginning point to say anything about the ending point. Anyway, so that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. See you next time.